Okay, hi everyone, welcome to week 8 and welcome to our 7th GM. I know that there's quite a few people taking midterms or attending events today, so we'll be recording this meeting for those who are missing it. Okay, next slide please. Jumping into announcements for winter GM, it's either going to be Wednesdays, 5 to 6 p.m. or 7 to 8 p.m. on Zoom. Leadership team will decide on which times work the best and we'll send out a final decision by the end of next week. Additionally, we have a social this Friday at Kirkhope Hall from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. I know Crystal has been planning a lot for it. So if you want to RSVP, it's found on Slack. We'll have games, giveaways, and food for you to eat. So be sure to come through at our very first social. Next, we have our Thanksgiving Instagram bingo. So I'll let Max talk about that.
Yeah, hey guys. The lovely PR team created an Instagram fundraiser bingo. This is going to be, all the proceeds are going to be donated to Movement Disorders Clinic. And so I'll be sending out the actual graphic in the Slack soon, and then also a list of when everybody should be posting. So I'll have like a PR post one day, education post one day, outreach post one day. And yeah, that's pretty much it from, oh yeah, another thing. So we're also going to be doing another fundraiser week 10, like Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And this is just going to be like a bake sale. So PR team and I, we've been baking a bunch. And we'll have that bake sale during those times. So I'll send out a sign up sheet later if you guys want to come help out and raise more money as well. That's pretty much it from me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Max and PR. Next slide, please, Sasha. Okay, so again, shadowing committee, please fill out the interest form by the end of today so that Pauline and Shavia can determine who will be on their new committee. Next, we have the brain cutting conference we talked about last week. There's a session held tomorrow at 9 a.m. So if you're looking to go, feel free to join the brain cutting channel in Slack and find a buddy to walk over. Some other updates, we won't have a meeting next week. We hope you have a nice Thanksgiving week with your families. And then go Bruins because there's that game coming up against USC. And lastly, for our last GM of the quarter, it's going to be during week 10. We'll be having a quarter recap / banquet and then some online social time. So it'll be a nice, fun meeting. All right, and that's all the announcements I have for today. I'll pass it on to education.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about motor neurons, what they are, where they exist, and what can go wrong if they're damaged. So this is the overview of what we're going to talk about today. Next slide. So basically one type of motor neuron are the upper motor neurons, and they're located in the motor cortex of the brain and the brainstem. And so they're basically in charge of actually delegating or basically telling your brain what's going on in terms of movement, and they connect the cerebral cortex, the brainstem, and the spinal cord. And so it also allows your brain to tell your body what to do. And damage to the upper motor neurons can be considered pyramidal insufficiency, and pyramidal just indicates what it looks like. So they look like kind of like pyramidal, like triangular shaped neurons. Next slide. So as you can see from the picture, your upper motor neurons are in the brain, and then they go all the way down through your brain to your brainstem, all the way down to the spinal cord, and then will release onto a muscle or a gland. And so the pyramid, so there's 3 major tracks, and each track does something a little bit different. And if you end up taking neuroanatomy, you'll have to learn them very, very carefully. But in more general terms, the pyramidal tract is related to voluntary movement, so you get to control that. The reticulospinal tract goes basically from your reticulum, which is like closer to your brainstem, and is in charge of autonomous actions and maintaining muscle tone. So that's more of the movements that you're not aware of. And then rubrospinal tract is the regulation of posture. Can be both voluntary and involuntary, but it really depends on like where you are, how you're sitting, and things like that. Next slides. And so the next set are the lower motor neurons, which are located in the spinal cord. And again, luckily they're very easy to memorize, but they're the ones that your upper motor neurons will synapse onto. And then their terminals will extend all the way to the muscle fibers and the tendons. And there's different kinds of lower motor neurons depending on where they synapse. So the somatic motor neurons, those will synapse directly onto your muscles. And basically your biceps, your triceps, that's all the somatic motor neurons. The special visceral and the general visceral motor neurons will synapse onto like organs, and more involuntary movement will control more involuntary movement. And there's 3 types of somatic motor neurons: alpha, beta, and gamma.
And now a little bit about the function of the lower neurons. So their basic function is to transmit signals from the upper motor neurons and send those signals to the effector muscle. Basically what the effector muscle does is it helps perform a movement. So it takes charge of like the muscle contractions that happen in order for for us to carry out a movement. So one type of lower neuron is a spinal lower motor neuron. And what these do are they control movements of the eyes, face, and tongue. And then they also control functions like chewing, swallowing, and vocalization. Then we also have alpha motor neurons, lower neurons that similar to the spinal lower motor neurons, they control muscle contractions. And then you have gamma motor neurons, which regulate muscle length and tone. And basically what they do is they regulate your stretch reflex. And that basically helps adjust your muscle length and tone, which then helps with muscle contraction.
And now Z will go over ALS.
Sorry. So ALS stands for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and this term comes from the Greek language. And so amyo means no muscle nourishment, and trophic means waste away. So when the muscles are malnourished, it wastes away. And the lateral refers to nerve cells that control muscle movement, and sclerosis means hardening. So together, the term means that when the nerve cells that are motor neurons degenerate, the muscles are malnourished. And in other words, the muscles do not receive messages from the motor neurons, leading to the hardening and malfunctioning of muscles. And this is a progressive disease, meaning that it will get more and more serious. The effects include inability to speak, eat, move, and even breathe. And most people with ALS die within 3 to 5 years after the symptoms first start appearing due to respiratory failure. And next slide, please. So there are 2 types of ALS. Sporadic ALS just means that the disease occurs at random. And this is true for about 90 to 95% of all ALS cases. The familial ALS accounts for 5 to 10% of all cases. And this occurs when an individual inherits the disease from a parent. And recent research has shown that the disease results from a defect in the C9orf72 gene, which is a gene responsible for the production of a protein found in motor neurons, or a mutation in the SOD1 gene, which is a gene involved in the production of an enzyme. And here I showed a picture of Stephen Hawking, and he is probably one of the most well-known cases of ALS. And for treatment of ALS, there is currently no treatment to reverse the damage to motor neurons or cure ALS, but there are treatments that help control symptoms and prevent unnecessary complications and make living with the disease easier. There are currently 2 medications approved by the FDA to treat ALS. The first one is riluzole, which is an oral medication believed to reduce damage to motor neurons by decreasing levels of glutamate. And glutamate, as covered by previous meetings, is a neurotransmitter that transports messages between nerve cells and motor neurons. And the second one is edaravone, Neuron, which is given by an intravenous infusion, and it slows the decline of daily functioning in persons with ALS.
Yep, and now we're going to talk about PMA, which stands for progressive muscular atrophy, which is kind of similar to ALS, but instead the muscles will waste away over time, and it affects mainly the lower motor neurons. So again, the neurons that exist in the spinal cord that connect to the muscle tissue. And it causes fasciculation, which is like a twitching sensation under the skin. And if you were to like see a video of it, it would look kind of like if there was like if your heartbeat was like underneath your skin. So it's kind of like twitching and like spasming. And it will usually spread from the arms or legs across for about several years and can lead to damage all across the body. Next slide. So the cause of the disease is unknown, and it's considered to be a combination of environmental and genetic factors. There's no one single test to diagnose if somebody has PMA. And so doctors will go through a combination of symptoms, family medical history, brain and spinal cord scans, nerve and muscle tests, blood tests, and spinal fluid tests are used. And so it will require a compilation of information in order to finally be able to come to a diagnosis. Treatment includes exercise and nutrition, just making sure that your muscles are constantly being worked on so that the muscle tissue that you do have, you're constantly signaling it to it. So you're decreasing the rate of tissue damage. And like Z said, riluzole is also used for PMA, and it will be used at the point of the disease when the muscle tissue in your throat starts to degrade, and basically it will block the release of glutamate, which is an excitatory transmitter, and it will prevent ventilator dependence. And so it will keep the muscle tissues in the throat working a little bit longer so people can breathe better. And I think Rita will be taking us through PLS next.
Yeah, so PLS stands for primary lateral sclerosis, and basically what it is where nerve cells in the brain that control movement are failing over time. So some symptoms that you typically would see with this would be weakness in your voluntary muscles, difficulty with balance, difficulty with chewing, swallowing, a bunch of things like this. And there's also the effect of mood swings and changes in your emotional state. And typically PLS occurs within ages 40 to 60. But there is the possibility that if a parent does have PLS, they can pass it over to their children through their genes. And PLS is very similar to ALS, which we discussed earlier, but PLS typically progresses a little bit more slowly. And then in the next slide, we can see that there are no treatments that completely prevent or cure PLS, but there are just some preventative measures with all the different symptoms that we see. So for example, with the muscle spasms, there could be oral medication, the mood swings could be treated with antidepressants, and just a bunch of little things here and there that can be combined to overall decrease the effects of PLS, but there's no one single solution for this. And then if we move on to the next slide, we see another disorder, which is called progressive bulbar palsy, which is PBP. And this involves the lower motor neurons, which conduct messages from the brainstem and spinal cord to the brain. And the symptoms for this disorder are also very similar. There's difficulty with speech and swallowing, weak jaw and facial muscles, which can affect their speech and swallowing, weak limbs. And there's also, I forgot to mention it here, but there's also emotional changes as well, such as mood swings. And PBP is a variant form of ALS. So sometimes one might be diagnosed with PBP first, and then later on it can develop into harsher forms such as ALS. And once again, for PBP, there's no treatments, but similar to PLS, there's just a combination of treatments that can alleviate all the different symptoms that you see, such as the oral medication, speech devices that help with the speech and swallowing, separate medicine, and antidepressants for the mood swings.
Yeah, so now we'll be going to case studies to see how some of these disorders that we just talked about present themselves in patients' lives and how you think you could go about diagnosing and treating them. And so yeah, just don't worry about like getting anything right or wrong, just because we're all here to discuss with each other and just come up with ideas. But yeah, so first off, we have our first patient. And so patient A is a 57-year-old male presenting 2 months after signs of weakness in the right leg that was starting to spread to his left leg. He is unable to walk unassisted, but does have normal reflexes, and electromyography readings shows involuntary spontaneous firing of motor units, which lead to the fasciculations. And he's also recently had more trouble speaking, as well as some trouble breathing as well. And so with the next slide, we'll be going into breakout rooms. And so I can also copy the scenario into the chat, but basically we can just start discussing like any initial thoughts or impressions you had of this scenario. And then we can also go into like what you think maybe this patient has in terms of diagnosis, as well as how you could go about treating them. And then finally, if you have any other parting thoughts or conclusions about this case. And so we can just go into breakout rooms for a few minutes and go from there.
Yeah, Tiffany, would you be able to create a couple breakout rooms for us here about?
Yes, can we? Okay,
around
great. I was gonna ask to post the
6?
information first and the questions in the chat so people can have access. All right, great. Thank you, RT. Okay, so I'm going to open the breakout rooms now and give it around 6 to 7 minutes.
So our second case study is basically a patient B is a 7-year-old female presenting with progressive weakness of muscles in the legs. At first, it seemed like clumsiness, but she also has difficulty balancing and there's stiffness in her legs. Genetic testing reveals 2 copies of mutations in the ALS2 gene passed from her parents. So same thing, go over the case study in your groups, kind of discuss like what things pop out to you, any diagnoses you think that you would want to make, any treatment plans that you think would be really helpful for her, and any just major thoughts in general.
And you don't have to just go off of information that was given in the presentation. So like, feel free to go off and do your own research on possible treatments or anything interesting that you may find online. And that would be a really good point for discussion too.
Alrighty, so the prompt is sent in chat and then all the new breakout rooms have been created.
Okay, so for case study 1, so patient A was properly diagnosed with ALS, and I think one of the groups said that. So the doctors determined an integrative treatment plan to delay disease progression. Riluzole was orally taken, which reduces damage to motor neurons and decreases the need for ventilators in the disease progression. Physical and occupational therapy helped with quality of life, and speech and breathing support was also started. Unfortunately, as is the case with many ALS diagnoses, patient A passed after 4 years, as the mortality is very much linked to rapid after the onset of symptoms. And then case study 2. So as a lot of us said, the person was diagnosed with rare juvenile PLS. And it's one of those ones where it kind of sucks because once it's rare, it's harder to do things about it. And there's not a lot of money for research on how to treat it and find cures for it. But in this case, doctors gave oral medications like baclofen and tizanidine to reduce muscle spasms. And I think Anubhav mentioned that in his explanation, which is great. Physical therapy was also started in addition to speech therapy and nutritional support. And she's also offered assistive devices to help in daily life, which I think Clara mentioned and Neha mentioned. So yeah, great job, everyone. Great job for getting all of these, and really great job on adding to the discussion. So really, really glad with what you guys came up with. And I think, yeah, that concludes our presentation for this week. Really appreciate you all coming and being a part of our discussion.
All right, and really quickly, we have another announcement by Max.
Yeah, hey guys. So I'm gonna send in the chat the link to actually like the scheduling, or it's a spreadsheet that contains like all your guys' names, and it's for the fundraiser that's happening throughout this week and part of next week for the Instagram bingo. So it also provides a schedule of like when teams should post as well. So if you guys could fill that out, that'd be amazing for on our end. And yeah, I hope you guys come up with some good dares or like truths, and excited to see what you guys have. But thank you. I'll post
Awesome.
again
Thank
in
you,
the
Max.
Slack to remind. Sorry,
Yeah, we'll be
sorry.
posting all the announcements once again in Slack. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming out. I hope you have a nice and safe Thanksgiving. We'll see you in week 10.